My name is Abigail Mercer. I was 34 years old when my sister told me, without a hint of hesitation, to go find somewhere else to die. She said it 3 days after we buried our parents. 3 days. The flowers on their graves hadn't even started to wilt. Sympathy cards still covered the dining room table. The whole house still carried that heavy after-funeral smell of baked casseroles, coffee, and perfume from people who had stopped by to offer condolences. Everything in that home still felt tender and raw. And there was Vanessa, my sister, my own flesh and blood, standing in the doorway with her husband Graham and a stack of moving boxes, like she had been waiting for the right moment to clear me out. At that point, I was still recovering from the car accident that had almost killed me 2 years earlier. I walked with a cane. Some days I moved almost normally. Other days the pain in my back was so sharp that just getting out of bed felt like a full-body battle. But none of that mattered to Vanessa. When she looked at me, I could see exactly what she thought. A burden. A problem. Something in the way. What she never understood was this. Being hurt is not the same thing as being weak. But to understand what happened after our parents died, before the will, before the secrets, before everything Vanessa believed would belong to her slipped through her fingers, you have to know what life looked like before all of it came apart. 2 years before my parents died, I had a life I was proud of. I owned a small landscape design business in Hartford. I designed private gardens for wealthy clients, worked on restoring the grounds of historic homes, and had recently landed a contract with the city's botanical society that felt like the break I had been waiting for. For once, things were stable. Better than stable. They were finally good. Then one wet, miserable evening, a drunk driver blew through a red light and erased the life I knew. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance ride. I don't remember the emergency room. My first clear memory is opening my eyes in a hospital bed, machines humming around me, my mother crying quietly in a chair, and my father looking like 10 years had landed on his face overnight. The doctor explained that my spine had been severely injured. I had been in surgery for 11 hours. They had placed metal rods in my back. Recovery, if it came, would be long. There was a real possibility I would never walk again. In a single night, the ground shifted under everything. My apartment became impossible because of the stairs. My business needed more physical effort than I could give. Bills piled up faster than I could even process them. When my parents offered me a room in their house, I said yes because I didn't have another choice. So I moved back home, back into the room I had grown up in, back into a version of life I never imagined I would return to. For 18 months, I lived in a wheelchair. Even now, saying that number out loud doesn't feel real. I'd always been independent, the kind of person who solved her own problems and carried her own weight. Suddenly, I needed help reaching plates, carrying laundry, and doing all the little things nobody notices until they can't do them. My mother sat with me on the worst days and read to me when I was too exhausted to focus. My father built a ramp out to the garden so I could sit outside and feel the sun on my face. Neither of them ever made me feel ashamed. Not once. Vanessa was another story. She called now and then, maybe once a month if that. When she did, her concern never seemed to be for me. Most conversations began the same way. I'd answer the phone, and after a pause, she would say, "Oh, you're still there. Put Mom on." You're still there. As if my existence was temporary. As if I were lingering where I didn't belong. Then, 4 months before my parents died, something happened that felt impossible. I started walking again. First with a walker, then with a cane. Every step was slow. Every step hurt. But every step belonged to me. I had clawed my way back to them. I fought for each inch of progress. Vanessa barely reacted. If she noticed, she didn't let it show. In her mind, I was still the damaged sister, the dependent one, the one who had already fallen behind and would stay there. The first time I truly realized how cruel she had become was Christmas. She arrived with Graham and their 2 children, Sophie and Owen, and took over the house within an hour. Vanessa criticized where my mother kept the serving dishes, moved furniture around without asking, and spoke to everyone as if she were supervising staff instead of visiting family.
I pushed myself hard getting ready for them. I made Sophie's favorite pancakes. I cooked homemade macaroni and cheese for Owen. I stood at the stove for hours, leaning on my cane when the pain flared, because I wanted to help, I wanted to contribute, I wanted to feel like I still had something to offer. On Christmas morning, everyone gathered in the living room for our annual family photo. The tree was glowing. Wrapping paper covered the floor. My father positioned the camera. The kids were squabbling over where to stand. My mother kept adjusting ornaments. Then Vanessa looked at me and smiled the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Abigail," she said, "maybe you should skip this one." I thought I had heard her wrong. "Skip what?" "The picture," she said lightly. "We want a nice one for the Christmas card." The room fell silent. I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew. She shrugged. "The cane ruins the look. I can still feel the heat that rushed into my face. I had fought like hell to stand there. I wasn't in a wheelchair anymore. I was upright. I was present. I was trying. And still, somehow, I was embarrassing. I knew arguing with Vanessa would only make the moment uglier, so I did the only thing I could do without falling apart in front of everyone. I smiled, nodded, and walked into the kitchen. From the window, I watched my family pose without me. I heard the camera snap over and over, and with every click, something in me sank. What I didn't know then was that my father had seen all of it. 3 months later, both my parents were dead.
They had flown to California for an old friend's wedding. The weather was good. There was no reason the trip should have ended in disaster. But their plane went down over Nevada, and by the time the authorities called, it was already over. The official explanation was mechanical failure. They said death was quick, as if that was supposed to soften anything. It didn't. I was out in the garden trimming rose bushes when the phone rang. 30 seconds later, the world I knew was gone. The days after that exist in my memory as fragments, funeral arrangements, legal forms, neighbors dropping off food, endless phone calls, people saying things they thought were comforting. Vanessa arrived almost immediately and took control of everything. The flowers, the service, the reception, the guest list, she managed it all like she was producing an event. I was too numb to fight her.
At the funeral, I sat in the front row and looked around at a room full of people I barely recognized. Many weren't there because they loved my parents. They were Vanessa's social circle, business acquaintances, polished strangers showing up to be seen. 3 days after the burial, Vanessa asked to speak with me. She was standing in the living room with her arms crossed. Graham hovered behind her like a nervous shadow. "I spoke to the lawyer," she said. I asked which lawyer. "Our parents' estate lawyer," she replied vaguely. "Everything goes to me, the house, the accounts, all of it." I asked to see the will. She said no. I asked to see the documents. Again, no. Something about the whole thing felt wrong instantly. My parents had used the same attorney for over 20 years. If Vanessa had really spoken to him, she would have said his name. Instead, she kept hiding behind that vague phrase, "the lawyer." That night, I sat alone in my father's study, surrounded by everything that still felt like him. His desk, my mother's reading chair, the view of the garden from the window. It hit me then that losing the house would be like losing them a second time. Every memory I had of being loved lived in those walls, so I started looking. I searched drawers, cabinets, folders, old files, anything that might tell me whether Vanessa was lying. Hours later, in the bottom drawer of my father's desk, I found a business card, Lawrence Caldwell, estate attorney. On the back, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. "Call him. He knows everything." My father was not a man who left mysterious notes, ever, so I knew it mattered. 3 days later, Vanessa came back with cardboard boxes and dropped them at my feet. "Pack," she said. "You need to be out by Friday." I stared at her. I asked for more time. She looked at me with open contempt, still acting helpless.
I reminded her I had nearly died 2 years earlier. She nudged one of the boxes with her shoe. "You've milked that long enough?" That was when Evelyn, the nurse who had helped care for our parents, walked in from the kitchen. Our neighbor Judith was with her. Both of them heard every word. Vanessa stepped closer to me, so close I could smell her perfume, and said, in a voice flat as stone, "Find somewhere else to die." The room froze. I couldn't breathe for a second. Evelyn looked horrified. Judith put a hand to her chest like she'd been struck. Vanessa acted like she had said something perfectly reasonable. Then I noticed Evelyn take a small notebook from her pocket and write something down. At the time, I didn't understand why. Later, I did. Judith moved to my side and looked Vanessa dead in the face. "Your mother would be ashamed of you." Vanessa rolled her eyes and said it was family business. Judith didn't back down. "I was family to your mother long before you learned how to be cruel." For the first time, Vanessa looked unsettled. Graham muttered that maybe they should leave. Vanessa snapped at him, repeated her Friday deadline, and stormed out. After the door slammed, the house went still. Judith rested her hand on my shoulder and said, "This isn't finished." I wanted to believe her. The next morning, Graham came back alone. He looked like a man unraveling, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders heavy, eyes avoiding mine. He told me Vanessa didn't know he was there and asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room. For a while, he just stared at the floor, then he said they needed money. At first, that made no sense. My parents' house alone was worth millions. That was when Graham slipped. The bad investments, he admitted, had wrecked them. Between loans, lenders, and losses, they were buried under about $400,000 of debt. The perfect life Vanessa flaunted was crumbling. They were terrified of losing their own home. And suddenly everything clicked. The urgency, the lies, the cruelty, the push to get me out. Vanessa didn't want our parents' house because she cherished it. She wanted to turn it into cash. Before Graham could say much more, Vanessa appeared in the doorway and yanked him out before he could finish. But by then, it was enough. That night, I picked up my father's business card and called Lawrence Caldwell. When I introduced myself, he said, "Ms. Mercer, I've been expecting your call." My father had told him I might reach out. I explained everything, Vanessa's claims, the threat to evict me, the supposed conversation with the lawyer. When I finished, he let out a quiet, almost amused breath and told me something that lifted the weight off my chest immediately. He hadn't spoken to my sister in years. Then he told me my parents had been very clear about their wishes and asked me to come to his office the next day. When I met him, he opened a file and told me my father had changed the will 6 months earlier, the day after Christmas. I didn't need him to explain why. I already knew. He said my father had finally seen things clearly. For the first time since the crash, since losing my business, since losing my parents, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The day before the official reading, Evelyn came to see me with a worn leather notebook. The second I touched it, I knew it had belonged to my mother. Evelyn told me my mother wanted me to have it. Then she told me something else. My mother had recorded a video message, and she had been very specific about when it was to be played. The official reading took place 3 days later at Mr. Caldwell's office. Vanessa arrived carrying herself like victory was already hers. Graham sat beside her, looking pale. I took my seat across from them. Mr. Caldwell entered with a thick blue file and a court reporter. After everyone settled, he asked Vanessa whether she had ever seen the complete will. She said yes. He asked her to describe it. She confidently said it was 4 pages. Then he set the real document on the table. It was over 30 pages long. I watched the color leave her face. Mr. Caldwell began reading. The first major provision concerned Vanessa. My parents had left her a substantial investment portfolio worth millions, but not in a form she could burn through. It had been placed in a trust with strict limits on what she could access each year. Vanessa looked stunned. Graham looked sick. Attached to the trust was a letter from my parents explaining exactly why they had done it. They loved Vanessa, but they had watched her make reckless financial choices for years. They were not going to let their life's work disappear into another one. Then Mr. Caldwell turned to the section that changed everything. The Mercer family home, along with the surrounding property, had been left to me, to Abigail Mercer. He read my parents' words aloud. I had cared for them. I had stood beside them. I had brought them peace. The home was mine. I couldn't stop the tears. Even in death, they had found a way to protect me. Then Mr. Caldwell said there was one more thing. He plugged in a USB drive. My parents appeared on the screen. My mother sat in her favorite chair. My father stood beside her. They looked tired, but steady. Certain. My mother spoke first. If we were watching, she said, then they were gone. My father looked into the camera and said, Vanessa, we love you, but love does not require us to ignore the truth. No one in that room moved. They said they had watched how she treated me, watched her dismiss me, watched her diminish me. Then my mother looked straight into the camera and said, Abigail, you were never useless. You were our strength. I broke. My father explained that they changed the will after Christmas, after watching Vanessa exclude me from the family photo because my cane spoiled the image. Then he said, the one thing that silenced the room completely. They would not allow their deaths to become another way for me to be erased. When the video ended, Vanessa bolted from the room. I found her in the hallway crying, the kind of crying people do when something has finally cracked open and there's no way to hold it together anymore. She said it wasn't fair. She said she had children. She said her life was falling apart. I listened. Then I reminded her quietly that she had once told me to find somewhere else to die. She flinched and claimed she hadn't meant it, but we both knew she had. She admitted they were losing everything. And yes, she had believed taking my home would save her. I could have humiliated her then. Maybe part of me wanted to, but my parents had not raised me to become the worst version of myself just because someone else already had. So I made her an offer. I told her I would loan her the money she needed to keep her own family from losing their house. She stared at me like she couldn't understand what she'd heard. Then I gave her one condition. She had to apologize. Not privately, not in a whisper, publicly, at a family dinner, in front of everyone who had watched her treat me like I was disposable. She said nothing and walked away. A month later, I moved into my parents' bedroom. At first, it felt strange, almost sacred, like I was borrowing a life that still belonged to them. But slowly, it started to feel like home. Physical therapy continued. I got stronger. Eventually, the cane became something I only reached for on bad days. Around town, people learned the truth. Some of the same people who had laughed awkwardly at Vanessa's comments avoided my eyes after that. Good, they should have. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life kept unraveling. She and Graham sold their oversized house. Their children switched to public school. Graham lost the kind of job that had once made them look untouchable. 3 weeks after the reading, Vanessa called me. She asked whether my offer still stood. I said yes. Then she said she still wasn't ready to apologize. I told her I still wasn't ready to write a check. She hung up. Months later, I finally opened my mother's diary. Most of it was ordinary life, weather notes, appointments, gardening thoughts, little observations from the day. But near the end, the entries turned personal. She wrote that she loved Vanessa, but worried that my sister had spent her life chasing appearances and approval. Then she wrote something about me that I will never forget. She said I never understood how much I had helped them after my accident. That while I believed they were the ones taking care of me in many ways, I had been taking care of them too. The final entry was written only weeks before they died. It said, Abigail is strong in ways most people never notice. Then, in the last line, my mother wrote, if you're reading this, remember, you were never useless. You were everything. I sat outside under the night sky and cried until I had nothing left. But those tears were different from the ones I had shed before. They didn't feel like breaking. They felt like release. 6 months later, I returned to landscape design. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. My first real project was restoring my parents' garden. I kept my mother's roses, laid new stone paths, and placed a bench where the afternoon light settled softest. A place to remember them, a place to breathe. 4 months after that, a letter came from Vanessa. Not a phone call, not a visit. A letter. She wrote that she was trying to understand how she had become the person she became. She wrote that she was sorry. She admitted it wasn't enough, but she said it was true. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in my desk drawer beside my mother's diary and my father's business card. It wasn't the apology I had demanded, but it was a beginning. We never became close again. Some damage doesn't disappear just because the truth finally comes out. Some relationships never return to what they once were. But in time, we learned how to exist in the same room, to exchange birthday cards, to speak with civility. Sometimes peace doesn't look like reconciliation. Sometimes it simply looks like distance without bitterness. And sometimes that is enough. My name is Abigail Mercer. I was told I was useless. I was told to go die somewhere else. Instead, I stayed. I healed. I reclaimed what was mine. I found my way back to myself. And I found home. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that self-respect matters and boundaries are not cruelty, then hold on to that. Sometimes the greatest victory is not revenge. Sometimes it's refusing to disappear.